CodePrep Podcast, the podcast that shows you how you can get into tech. Today, our guest is Sidney Collins. Sidney is a front-end developer with more than 10 years experience. She is the first front-end developer we have interviewed on CodePrep that also has a CS degree. She enjoys a wide range of hobbies, including ornate cosplay. I'll let her explain that later. She currently works for a startup here in Atlanta, Georgia. So let's get started. Sidney, can you tell our audience what your daily life is like as a front-end developer and why you chose to get into tech?
Well, the daily life. Normally, I just get into whatever I'm working on and just plow through it and try to ignore everybody around me. Normally it's trying to take whatever I'm working on and making sure that I'm understanding like all the requirements for the feature, and making sure that I have making sure that I have what I need to, like, I've talked to everybody that I need to about the feature, and trying to make sure that I'm on the right track. That way I can go into like a hole and just buckle down and figure out whatever I have to do to finish it.
Oh yeah, no, I hear you on that one. I am definitely on team anti-open office.
Oh gosh,
much noise. So we have discussed in the past your commitment to quality code. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what quality over expediency means to you?
One of the things you always learn in like software development 101 is the most expensive part of a software project is the maintenance part. And to come in and work as maintenance on a project can be absolute hell if it's just a mess. So most of the time, well, my dedication to quality too is I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I like everything to be uniform and pleasing to the eye and easy to read and all that kind of good stuff. But I think that when you take the time to make something good, it not only makes it easier for the people who are going to touch it after, but it's not, you don't have to worry about it breaking as much in the future. And say like 10 years from now, like if the aerial product it's still existing, then what if I'm not there and I'm not going to be able to just jump in and say, oh, here's how I did it and why. And it's going to take a lot more time for the developer working on it to figure it out. So trying to do it in a future-proof way at the beginning, when possible, because it's not always possible, but when possible, I think that saves time and money in the future.
Yeah, perfect.
And also, I personally think that when you take the time with the details, it makes the product itself look more clean and polished and like you care more, I think. That's just a personal.
You work at a startup here in Atlanta, and we all know startups are driven to do things as quickly as possible because they need to get their product out there. They need to make sure it's working. It's creating revenue so they can keep the doors open. There's also a trade-off in that when teams are working where they're going that fast, that quality sometimes drops off by the side, so that you don't have a standards for, like your style guides. You don't have a standard for, writing tests, or do you write tests? Do you have a standards for delivering your software and how things are written, like on feature branches and whatnot? So from your experience, from being a developer, front-end developer, what recommendations can you give to people that are interested in doing front-end development on how not to skimp on handling style guides and standards and making sure something's in place so that it helps you actually do your job efficiently and as quickly as possible?
I think part of it comes a little bit with experience because for me, one of the things I mentioned earlier is jumping in on old code bases that have existed for a long time and that haven't necessarily been well kept up. It can be very overwhelming, especially as a junior developer. You feel like you just feel like you're taking like all the time in your day just trying to figure out somebody's code. And I feel like that kind of from that experience, it made me want to be nice to future developers by trying to take the time to make sure something's well documented and make sure my code was concise and had good readability, didn't use variable names that say just didn't really describe what they're doing. Finding that line between abstracting too much and too little, which is a tough one. I tend to want to abstract too soon. But I think all of those things come a little bit with experience. But when you're first starting out, I think it might start as like a preference too. Because at that time, you're kind of figuring out what's important to you. And you as a developer, it may be more important that you knock out as much as you can in the beginning for a learning process. So to me, it really depends on like, I think that part of it is experience and part of it is just, and say like you were learning code and one of the things that was really pushed was test-driven development. When you get into a code base that say isn't yours, you're probably gonna want to push that forward with the code base, say if it's not in place. And a good thing is just learning to be able to explain why this is important and to be able to explain like how this is going to save time in the future, to save headaches in the future, going to catch more bugs and all that kind of stuff. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So you have a unique background for this particular podcast thus far, in that you have a very traditional background. You did an undergraduate of computer science, yes?
Yes.
What, when you were a wee lass, what led you to choose that major, and how was the experience of a standard computer science degree as a female? What was what got you there, and how was that journey?
Okay, this is kind of a long story, so I'll try to keep it succinct, but it is part of the journey. So I always tease that, well, I grew up in a very small town and just didn't have a lot of access to, I don't know, different people, different cultures, and all that kind of stuff. So when I got a hold of the internet, it was the greatest thing ever. I mean, honestly, I spent every hour of the day on the internet. And I always tease that the reason I got into coding is because I reached the end of the internet. So I decided, well, I was bored one day and I was like, well, what if I put something of my own out there? And that's when I kind of started looking and trying to figure out how to do it. And I remember I started with GeoCities back in the day, a page builder, drag and drop. And the reason I actually got into coding itself was because you couldn't center something. That's my perfectionism coming in.
You still can't in CSS.
I know. It is pretty tough still, especially figuring out with vertical centering. Yeah. Although CSS3 and CSS Grid CSS Flex had both helped that make it a little bit easier. But I figured out I think it was maybe looking at, they had a code view of the page builder, like where you drag stuff. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that's what pushed me to try to start learning code. So I did a bunch of stuff on my own, just projects. And honestly, another thing was, as I grew up, I would go visit my dad's office. He's a civil engineer and they do drafting. And I was around a bunch of like his employees doing that. So I was always around computers. I wasn't like building them or anything, but I always had a comfort around them. So I would just do these things for fun, just make little web pages. I remember one of my first ones, there's this Japanese character. I think the company is X, and it's called a tear panda.
Mm-hmm.
It's this cute flat panda, and I had a fan page for the tear panda. That was one of my
Oh.
early web pages. So when I got to college, I was studying English. I've always kind of had a side hobby of writing. So I was studying English with the intent to be an attorney. And in the beginning of school, we had you could take just random electives. And I took the web design electives for fun and also for easy A's or whatever. And I would do people's projects for them. I know that's bad, but people found out I was good at it. And they would like, oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And so I think that in my second, well, it may have been the first one. I think that one of the professors of the class took notice, I guess just because it came so, he wasn't having to teach me. I knew a lot of the stuff already. And we just got to talking, and he said, have you ever thought about doing this as a living? This is something that, you've really excelled in. And I was like, can you make money doing this? And he laughed really hard, and he's like, oh yeah, you can make a lot of money doing this. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I'd be willing to, think about it. And I started talking to him, and he was a professor in the computer science department. And also at that time, it coincided that I was trying to learn PHP on my own. And because it was different, it was just different, a different way of thinking. And I was struggling a little bit with it. And honestly, it was a selfish reason. I was like, well, if I'm taking computer science classes, it'll probably be a lot easier for me to learn how to do programming itself. So I ended up 2 years in switching my major to computer science. And at the University of Alabama at that time, the core curriculum language was C++, which was a huge difference from what I had ever touched. But it was very interesting and very helpful. I'd love to do it in my career sometime. I've never done it in my career, just in the educational setting. But that's really kind of how I got into it. I just had an interest for it. I just picked it up because I wanted to make something cool. And then I had somebody actually who took the time to have an interest in me and encourage me. And I guess the rest is history.
That's an interesting story, especially having, a guy that would basically say, you need to do this because you would be good at it. It's not something that normally females experience in tech. You've been in tech for almost a decade now, doing development and all that. From your 10-year experience, what is it like for females in tech? So what can you tell people that are looking to get into it, what they can expect on a day-to-day basis, and what challenges and what opportunities will they face?
So I was going back to the talking about the professor. I was very lucky because I didn't even know sexism existed because I was in such a good program. I mean, I was just a student. I was never treated anything differently. When I got out and started working, I ran into sexism, and it sucks because you're just like, whoa. I would literally have other guys on my team. I would tell them my ideas so that I could get my ideas heard. So they would speak up for me. And that, it really sucks, but I mean, I think it's something that females should know. It's getting a lot better, but you're still going to run into it. So it's a good piece of advice is just, and it's hard. I know it's hard because I still struggle with it, but it's just being confident in what you know and being willing to like fight for it and say, hey, I'm right here. You're going to listen to me. And The good thing is that that's more of an old school mentality. I think that's getting aged out a lot. But so, you can really find allies in your coworkers, and more women are in the field now. I think it's really cool that at Airbus Aerial, Terry was the first female developer I've ever worked with. So in all my other previous positions, I had just worked with guys, and they, for the most part, I worked with great people who were very encouraging and who would be my ally if I needed one. And the times that I have run into issues have been few and far between. But it is something, if somebody is interested in getting into it, just to be aware that you're going to face it, and just be ready for that, and always just have confidence in yourself, and just remember, hey, I am good at this, no matter what somebody says.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I love that you have that confidence, because, I'm very lucky. Full disclosure, I get to work with Sid. So I am fortunate to see her in action every day. I have to ask, though, because we're, obviously we're talking about getting into tech and how to advance your career, but, we are human beings with a full range of hobbies and interests. How do you balance the things that you do outside of work with the fact that you're always producing this awesome code? I mean, like I was telling Jennifer before you got on about your cosplay and the ornate and intricate costumes I've seen. Like, how do you find time to always be learning, always be studying, but also develop your hobbies and outside interests and just be a rounded human?
Well, full disclosure, I'm still learning. It is tough because I guess it's good and bad. So coding is a hobby. I enjoy it. I mean, honestly, I probably would not be successful at this job if I didn't enjoy it, because that's why I'm willing to put in the hours that I do, because it's just fun and I'm proud of what I produce and all of that. However, I do have a personality that is very one-track mind. Maybe it doesn't come through, but it very much is. I get on a tangent, and that's all I do. So it's still, like I said, even as far as I am in my career, it is still a learning experience. It's just kind of when you have free time, sitting back and organizing your time, and just trying to just know ahead of time, like, I'm going to have to be working on this for so long. I'm going to want to work on, I guess DragonCon this year kind of was an example, because I knew how much I needed to do to be ready, and because I've also been going to DragonCon for a little bit now, I know that I'm always at the last minute rushing, and I didn't want that. So I planned accordingly to that. But it took sitting down and, backing off and saying, okay, here's what I have coming up. Here's what usually it takes to do these things, and just trying to plan it out. But like I said, I am still learning. I guess another thing I would mention is that, so I also like video games, and Red Dead Redemption 2 just came out, and I was playing it and, playing and working at the same time. But then when I had a big project come up at the end of the year, I dedicated a lot of my free time to work, and I'm just now getting to pick Red Dead back up. So it's something that I probably could have balanced better, as I probably could have not just been heads down deep into work the whole time, and actually I guess I should take time to mention that you'll hear this a lot, and it's completely true, that if you're stuck on something, to just step back, go take a walk, go do something that you enjoy. It helps so much. But it's just forcing yourself to back off and quit. When I'm having a problem with something, I just want to sit there and dig and dig and dig until I figure it out. And that's not the best way to handle it, to approach it. So I kind of got off track there, but I was just mentioning that that would probably have helped me in my work life as well, to have just backed off, just gotten to a point in the day and said, okay, I need to dedicate some time to, non-work stuff, if that makes sense. So TLDR, I'm still learning.
That's good information, because at the very end of our podcast, one of the things we ask our guests to have is a recommendation on what you would recommend on what would help you balance your life or make your life better, as a person in tech. So is there one thing that you can recommend for our audience?
So this isn't really a specific here, do this type thing, but I would recommend, coming from the experiences I've had, confidence. Always have confidence in what you do. It shows. And if you believe in yourself, other people are going to be more apt to believe in you. If you can be your own cheerleader, other people are going to be like, hey, yeah, she knows what she's talking about. And it is something I still struggle with, because I am the type of person that talks myself down a lot, just because I've just always been somebody who's very humble about my skills, to a detriment to myself. And based on my experience, I think a lot of women come into it more like that. I'm not saying all women have confidence issues. I've just noticed that a lot of women are a lot more humble and don't rah, cheer themselves on as much as they should. So that would be one of my big recommendations, is just always know that, hey, you have this job for a reason, you're doing this for a reason, and your voice deserves to be heard. And believing in yourself, as long as you believe in yourself, you're more apt to be able to say, yeah, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about.
I love that. It actually brings us to a request for a recommendation on something that I think shakes everyone's confidence, even people who have been in our industry for 20, 30 years, the technical interview. Dun, dun, dun. How does one either have confidence or sufficiently fake confidence for a technical interview? Do you have any recommendations for preparing or for going into a technical interview situation?
So another thing I would mention, full disclosure, is I'm terrible at interviews. So I need to listen to this for recommendations as well, because people tell me all the time, they're like, you come into an interview and it's just like you don't come across as knowledgeable as you actually are. I really think that this is something that's happened later in my career, believe it or not. I think I had a lot more confidence towards the beginning. I don't know if I'm just getting older and the world sucks and I'm just like, oh, well, maybe I don't know anything I'm talking about. I doubt myself so much. So I go into an interview, and even if I know the answer to a question, I'll like tiptoe around it when I should just say the answer to the question type thing. So
yeah.
For getting ready and preparing for one, I think the best thing is to just, for me, I try to go through like coding questions. I know that, what is it? Oh goodness, Coder Wars. I think is a good way to practice some of your code. Just do quick little exercises. I think that do your research as best as possible to figure out what kind of interview it's going to be. I've done all kinds. I've done interviews where it's just a one-on-one chit-chat. I've done where they have a section dedicated to coding. I've done pair programming, or not. I actually haven't done pair programming. I've done it where I'm coding in front of the people who are interviewing me, and I've done a whiteboard interview. And oh goodness, all of them are very nerve-wracking, but just, you don't want to go into an interview and get blindsided when possible. So definitely try to find out more about the position that you're interviewing for and what type of questions they typically ask, if that's possible. That's not always possible. But then you're always going to be given, a job description. So just, I would say, make sure that the top things that you know that your strengths are and what they're looking for, just review that kind of stuff and be ready to talk about it and be ready to, and I think too, and this of course is just the type of people you work with. It's going to be different everywhere, but a lot of times I think it's been, as long as you don't go in the total direction of, I just don't know anything, I don't know what I'm talking about, why are you even interviewing me type thing. If you go in and you're willing to say, I don't know, but then tell them what you do know and how that you would figure out the answer. I think that goes a long way. And personally, I want to work with people who do that. I don't want to work with somebody who is going to say they know something to their detriment. And then when you get in the code base and you're like, why didn't you just ask the question? I mean, like, why didn't you just, because you just pretended to know something all along and now you've screwed something up type thing. So I would just say being willing to say you don't know when you don't know, but being ready to explain how you would find the answer and what you do know that would help finding that answer.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. That's God, that's great advice. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time out to come on this show. It has been a joy and pleasure to hear about your journey. And I hope that our listeners were listening and take some of your advice to heart. It was great.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And I hope that, the women that are listening that are interested in getting into coding, just don't let stuff get you down. Like, if you're interested in it, you deserve to do it, and just push forward and do it.
Awesome. Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Until next time, this has been CodePrep, the podcast.